Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm sure a few more folks will trickle in as we go. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Wendy Nas, COSSA's Executive Director, and this is COSSA Headlines, your monthly look at what's new and noteworthy in social science policy. Um, if you know the routine, this is what the agenda looks like for today. We will go through the latest developments here in Washington, and there are quite a few. And then we will spend most of our time on our deep dive topic today, which is to talk about women, minorities, and persons with disabilities in science and engineering. And we're lucky enough to have Elizabeth Grieco with us today to help us with that discussion. And then we'll finish off like we usually do with some homework. So let's get into it because there is a lot happening in the policy world right now. So first, in congressional news, as we've been reporting, the leaders of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee introduced the NSF for the Future Act earlier this spring. And over the last several weeks, the Subcommittee on Research and Technology has been holding a series of hearings to discuss the bill. And earlier, just this morning, the subcommittee reported out the bill, thereby advancing it to the full committee. We issued a statement in support of the legislation last week, generally applauding the bill for its comprehensive approach to strengthening NSF, enhancing its budget. It would more than double the NSF budget over 5 years, and preserving its role as the premier US basic science agency. As you may recall, the NSF for the Future Act does propose the creation of a new science directorate, Science and Engineering Solutions Directorate, which would be tasked with supporting more quote unquote use-inspired research and translating basic research findings into solutions to address societal challenges. That's somewhat of a controversial idea to create a new directorate legislatively. But as many of you may be aware, there is another proposal in the Senate to also create a new directorate, but with a very different focus. The Endless Frontier Act, which was reported out of the Senate Commerce Committee yesterday after a marathon 5-hour markup, would create a technology-focused directorate. And that bill, while similarly would create a new, more applied, use-inspired directorate, that's largely where the similarities end between the two bills. The Senate bill, Endless Frontier, is really looking at competitiveness with China and national security, while the House bill, the one that COSSA endorsed, is really looking to put NSF on a sustainable growth path into the future. It definitely addresses competitiveness, global competitiveness as well, and the need to invest in technology. But most importantly, it seeks to maintain NSF, as a basic science agency and promote and advance the agency overall. There were several, I think it's important to note, several amendments agreed to the Endless Frontier Act at yesterday's markup, and we haven't seen what the bill now looks like. So we have a side-by-side comparison on our website. We will update that once we understand what the amendments have done to change the legislation and report back. So this is definitely a bit of a moving target, but the bottom line here is that we have a House bill, we have a Senate bill. They're very different, both in scope, purpose, and in respect to the details as well. Neither bill is likely to pass the opposite chamber. So it really remains to be seen at this point if there will be some compromise or what the end game strategy is here. But stay tuned because we will be following that. And then in the meantime, appropriators are holding their hearings to begin their oversight of the fiscal 22 budget for NSF and other science agencies, including NIH, Department of Education, and others. We haven't seen the full Biden budget request yet, but we are hearing reports that we could see it by the end of May. So stay tuned for that. But early indications are that we should see robust budget requests for NSF, for NIH, and other agencies from the Biden administration. So we will report back hopefully in a couple weeks when we learn more. Okay. In other congressional news, last week we finally saw the confirmation hearing for Eric Lander to be the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. His nomination was made back in January before inauguration, but there were concerns by folks in the Senate over some of his past actions related to women in STEM, minorities in STEM, and some sort of clandestine meetings with the late Jeffrey Epstein. And so, when folks are elevated to high-level positions, a lot of these things come out, which had significantly delayed his hearing. But the hearing did take place last week. It was fairly supportive, although there were definitely concerns expressed about past conduct. But a lot of praise for his science credentials and for his work over his career in public service as well. If I had to bet, I would say that he will likely be confirmed, but it's not assured at this point. We have not seen a scheduled vote in the committee for his confirmation, and certainly haven't seen a vote on the full Senate floor yet. So stay tuned, and we will let you know once OSTP has its leadership in place. Also consuming a lot of congressional time at the moment, especially in the Senate, are concerns, continued concerns about research security, and in particular, new anti-China provisions. So the Senate has been introducing legislation. There's one piece, Strategic Competition Act of 2021, that's been introduced. It's bipartisan, and it includes a long list of measures to related to competition with China, but also related to security of the US research enterprise. One of the controversial pieces of the bill would increase oversight at academic institutions on foreign gifts, which may include research grants, by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, effectively giving CFIUS the power to suspend or cancel foreign granted activities at academic institutions if they're deemed harmful to national security. It's still very much a work in progress, this bill, and there are other bills, other hearings. The idea is that the Senate Majority Leader wants to develop a large China package that includes research, but other things as well. Endless Frontier, as I talked about earlier, could be included in that, and several other bills. So definitely a developing story, but we'll be monitoring very closely to see how it may potentially impact science, and if we see similar efforts in the House. There's definitely a lot of anti-China rhetoric by some in the House as well, but the Senate is very much taking the lead when it comes to legislating on this topic. Okay, switching gears to the executive branch, the National Science Board, which is the high-level advisory body to NSF and the President and Congress, is seeking nominees for its 2022-2028 class. It's a 6-year term, and nominations are requested by the end of May. This is a very important committee for us, for the research community and for social and behavioral science in particular. And right now there is not a lot of presence of social and behavioral scientists on the National Science Board. So we do welcome your ideas for the best of the best researchers from our fields who could potentially round out the National Science Board in its next class. The call for nominations does include specific areas of interest or expertise, including cyber infrastructure and computational science, private sector technology management, translation, innovation, partnerships, promotion of diversity in minority serving institutions, geosciences, STEM education, and engineering. But again, we also welcome any and all qualified names, particularly because at some point in the near future, PCAST, which is the President's Advisory Committee on Science and Technology, will be making appointments as well. And so it would be great to have a whole collection of social behavioral scientists who we could nominate for these really high level important positions. Okay, other, oopsie. Executive branch news, we're excited to announce that the White House has nominated Rob Santos to be the director of the Census Bureau. Rob is currently the president of the American Statistical Association, one of COSSA's governing members, and has a distinguished career holding positions at the University of Michigan's Survey Research Center, at NORC, Temple University, and lots of other roles. If confirmed, Santos will be the first permanent director of color, and he will take over for acting director Ron Jarman, who's been leading the agency kind of off and on over the years, but certainly since the departure of the last director, gosh, a year ago or so. And then finally, in executive branch news, just wanted to flag, if you haven't seen it yet, the latest solicitation for the Minerva program at DoD has been announced. This is for FY21, and per usual, the solicitation includes specific topics of key areas of interest to address. So it's DoD, so it's a very targeted research program. Some of the issues include social implications of environmental change, security risks in ungoverned, semi-governed, and differently governed spaces, analysis of foreign influence operations on cross-cultural perspectives, and others. So I invite you to read the full solicitation, and applications are going to be due at the end of September. Turning to the community, there are quite a few advisory and committee positions right now that are seeking nominations. One is for the Committee on National Statistics at the National Academies is creating a panel to evaluate the quality of the 2020 census. And this panel will prepare a consensus study that'll be sort of a thorough operational and procedural review of the decennial census. And it'll seek to assess the trustworthiness of the 2020 census data products, but also provide some solid ground for testing and experimentation that will lead to the 2030 census. This one, hopefully you've seen and you've already been thinking about it, but nominations are due tomorrow, May 14th. So if you haven't looked at that yet, there's a nomination form online. You can go ahead and submit that. Also from CNStat at the National Academies are two other panels that are preparing reports on data infrastructure for federal statistics and social and economic research in the 21st century. These panels will look at how data infrastructure is being governed, the skills needed to modernize data infrastructure, and challenges to data sharing among different populations and economic sectors. This one is accepting nominations through May 21st, and you can use their online nomination form for that one as well. And there's the link there. Also in community news, so it also in sort of COSSA membership news, two of our member organizations have named new presidents in recent weeks. The Social Science Research Council has named Anna Harvey, a leading scholar of government law and inequity and professor of politics at NYU, to be the 15th president and CEO of SSRC. She succeeds Alondra Nelson, who we all know and love and is currently serving a role in the Biden administration in OSTP. She'll assume her role on July 1st. And then the American Academy of Political and Social Science has named Marta Tienda, a familiar name to many of us, professor of demography, sociology, public affairs at Princeton, to be its next president. And she will take over for Ken Pruitt, former COSSA president, who led the AAPSS since 2015. So a big welcome to both of them. And finally, just in some COSSA news, we joined colleagues yesterday for WMPD Day, which was sort of a joint activity by COSSA and FABS and Sage Publishing and NSF and some other partners in the scientific community to sort of celebrate the findings of the Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities report that we'll hear more about in just a moment. And so there was a day worth of activities, webinars, panel discussions about the need for diversity in STEM broadly defined, but also the work that still needs to be done for us to get there. So you can check out the information there, and I look forward to continuing the discussion today with our deep dive. And then finally, our latest Why Social Science post comes from Ellen Peters, director of the University of Oregon's Center for Science Communication Research, who writes a very timely piece on ways policymakers can communicate with numbers and statistics in ways that enhance rather than diminish the public's understanding. And I, as someone who sometimes struggles with numbers and statistics, found it very enlightening. So I invite you to check that out at whysocialscience.com. Okay, so with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Liz Grieco to join us for our deep dive today. She's a senior analyst at the National Science Foundation's National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, or NCSES. And she's worked at Pew Research Center. She focused on journalism and media research, publishing work on the size and socioeconomic characteristics of newsroom employees. She worked at the Census Bureau, Department of Homeland Security, and lots of other places. And she has been active in the Women, Minorities, Persons with Disabilities report and lots of the activities, I'm sure, of the NCSES. And so on the heels of WMPD Day, we thought it'd be helpful for her to talk about some of the findings and to hear what we can learn about that report. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you, Liz, to go ahead and share yours. Perfect.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for the invitation to come talk with you all today. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Liz Grieco. Please call me Liz. I am a senior analyst at NCSES in the National Science Foundation, and I'll be talking today about, I'll be discussing the findings from the 2021 Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities in Science and Engineering report. That's quite a mouthful to say. So throughout the presentation, I'll be using the abbreviation WMPD when referring to the Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities in Science and Engineering report. I'm going to start with a little bit of background information. On April 29th, the NCSES released the congressionally mandated 2021 WMPD report. Now, ensuring accessibility and diversity is essential to promoting an effective U.S. science and engineering enterprise. And to that end, the biennial WMPD report provides valuable information that helps us understand education and workforce trends across different demographic groups and different demographic characteristics. The goals of my discussion today are to provide you with a general overview of the information included in the 2021 WMPD report and to highlight some of the findings from the report. Now, when discussing participation in STEM within the WMPD report, we frequently use the term underrepresentation. I'll begin by describing the term underrepresentation and providing examples of underrepresentation among some key demographic groups. So what do we mean when we say underrepresentation? Underrepresentation in science and engineering refers to having a disproportionately low representation in science and engineering fields compared to the representation in the US population. So as you can see from this graphic, Black and Hispanic men and women are underrepresented in science and engineering occupations relative to the representation in the US population. And conversely, you can also see that white and Asian men and Asian women are overrepresented in science and engineering occupations, again, relative to their size, the percentage in the total population. So while the previous slide described underrepresentation in science and engineering occupations, underrepresentation can occur at many transition points within an individual's career pathway. Now, overall, underrepresented minorities, and remember this includes Blacks, Hispanics, and Native American Alaska Natives, underrepresented minorities account for roughly 32% of the US population. And as you can see in this graphic, their share is lower at different points in the S&E career pathway. While underrepresented minorities are 32% of the total population, they're only 24% of the S&E bachelor's recipients, 14% among S&E doctorate recipients, and 15% of those employed in S&E occupations. Similar to the differential levels of underrepresentation that exist among minorities, there are differential levels of underrepresentation among women within the S&E career pathway. While women are 50% of the total population and also 50% of the S&E bachelor's degree recipients, they are only 45% of S&E master's degree recipients and 41% of S&E doctorate recipients. So women are underrepresented among S&E advanced degree recipients. Now, having provided a high-level definition of the term underrepresentation, as well as some of the key findings from the report that help describe where we are now, I'll turn to my attention to providing an overview of the report. The report, in a very general sense, includes two main topical sections: education and workforce. And in this next section of the presentation, I'll describe some of the educational findings, which includes enrollment, completions, and field of degree information. This slide examines educational trends over the past decade to inform the conversation of whether progress has been made at reducing underrepresentation. This figure provides the share of S&E degrees awarded to underrepresented minorities over the past decade. And in this figure and throughout the report, again, remembers that underrepresented minorities include Black, Hispanic, American Indians, and Alaska Natives. The share of S&E degrees awarded to underrepresented minorities at all three degree levels has increased over the past decade. So while the three groups remain underrepresented in S&E degree completions relative to their representation in the US population, they have reduced their underrepresentation in the past 10 years. So we've made some progress, although we have work to go. In addition to examining representation by degree level, as discussed in the previous slide, the WMPD report also looks at representation by field of degree. This figure examines the number and share of engineering degrees awarded to women over the past 2 decades. Now, this is kind of a complicated graph, so bear with me. On the left side of the figure includes the percent of engineering degrees awarded to women by degree level and year. The right side of the figure includes the number of engineering degrees awarded to women, also by degree level and year. Over the past 2 decades, both the percent and number of women earning engineering degrees has increased at all degree levels. And within the report, similar information is provided for other science and engineering fields of degree if you are interested. The previous two slides were designed to give you an indication of the type of information that's available in the report, especially that's included in the educational topical section. And as you can imagine, there are a number of other topics of interest covered in the reports, and many of them are listed on the slide. So if you're interested in any of these topics, I'll give you the link to the report at the end of my discussion. Now, having described the educational topical section of the report, I'll turn my attention to the workforce findings, which includes employment status and occupational information. This slide examines the unemployment rate among scientists and engineers by sex, race, ethnicity, and disability status. The unemployment rate for the total population is also provided, and that's the bar in red at the far right of the graph. When we discuss workforce data within the WMPD report, it should be noted that all data in this report were collected before the pandemic. This is all pre-pandemic. The next WMPD report will be released in 2023 and will reflect data collected during the pandemic. But unfortunately, this report does not have information about the pandemic in it. Overall, in 2019, the unemployment rate for scientists and engineers was lower than that of the total US labor force, indicating a strong demand for those with S&E expertise. However, there was a variation among the rates, with Black scientists and engineers having a higher unemployment rate than whites, and persons with disabilities having a higher unemployment rate than those without disabilities. Within the workforce portion of the report, salary is examined as an indicator of the benefits of a degree and how those benefits extend across different demographic groups. This figure provides the median salary for employed scientists and engineers by occupation, field, and demographic group. And as you can see in the graph, salaries of scientists and engineers vary considerably across occupations and across demographic groups. Within S&E occupations, men's median salary is higher than women's, and Asians' median salary is higher than other racial and ethnic groups. But generally, and this is the general takeaway, is scientists and engineers working in S&E occupations tend to have higher salaries than those working in S&E related or non-S&E occupations. In addition to discussing salary across all occupations and sectors, the report also examines characteristics of employment in the academic sector. This figure examines the percent of underrepresented groups, namely women, underrepresented minorities, and persons with disability, within the academic sector over the past 2 decades. The share of academic doctoral positions held by women increased from 26% in 1999 to 39% in 2019. The share of underrepresented minorities increased from 7% to 9%, but note that percent is still considerably less than their share of the population, which, as I mentioned earlier, is about 1/3. As I did with the education section, the previous 3 slides were designed to give you an indication of the type of information included in the WMPD report's workforce topical section. And as you can see, there are numerous other topics of interest covered in the workforce section, as I list on this slide. I'd like to draw your attention to the second to last bullet on the slide. In the 2021 report, we have included a section on the skilled technical workforce, which consists of individuals and occupations that require knowledge in a technical domain, but do not require a bachelor's degree. efforts have been made in recent years within NCSES and more broadly across the National Science Foundation to increase our understanding of this very important population. And the information in the 2021 report reflects these efforts. Now, as I mentioned before, the WMPD report was released on April 29th. As Wendy mentioned, we celebrated WMPD yesterday, and I hope some of you were available to attend the festivities. We had a really good time, a lot of interesting conversations. What I've highlighted today is really just a very small part of the information available through the WMPD website. On our website, you can find the full report. It's done, in HTML version. It's also a PDF you can download if you'd like to take it with you. There's also a data tables section. If you are really interested in digging into the data yourselves, but don't want to, run a SAS program or deal with any kind of a data tool, a lot of these data tables are very detailed. So I suggest you take a look at those. It's a very, very good resource. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to spend a little time with you this afternoon. Here is my contact information. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or you want more information. And again, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz, very much. It's really, really interesting. And I just want to underscore just how valuable this report is and the accompanying data. It really does tell an interesting story. I haven't read it cover to cover, although I have been scanning it and participated in WMPD Day, but I'm still left with some questions. So one is, if you could sum up the gains that you've observed in this report relative to the report 2 years ago, what would you say were the most significant changes? And I know the skilled technical workforce piece is new, but either in terms of demographics or, my sort of follow-on question is related to field of degree. And are you observing sort of winners and losers, consistently or, across reports every couple of years?
That I will say first off is a hard question to answer, in part because the report is only, it's only 2 years apart. And as all good social scientists know, the rate of change of a lot of this stuff does not occur quickly. But one thing I want to emphasize that I do show in the presentation, and I can even share this slide, which is a little extra. The big takeaway is there have been changes over time, especially in the last 10 years. They're not dramatic. They're not like, we're not seeing, changes of 25, 30, 50%. But one of the good things is that we're seeing the trend up. There are more S&E graduates, people working in SE occupations who are underrepresented by minorities and women. So I think the big takeaway is there is progress. You're going to see this more in the numbers themselves. And you could argue, well, hey, Liz, there's it's 10 years later, there's always more of us. But the fact that everyone's trending up means that everyone's participating in this increase. We may not see the change dramatically in the percent changes, especially for various fields of degree. One of the things that I did think was also worth noting, and again, this was mentioned in the slides, if I can get it to move forward. No, I want to go backwards. If I can go up here, and that is when we're talking about engineering degrees. That's a big deal, because one of the places that women in general have always lagged behind men is in engineering degrees. And so the fact that we do see, yeah, these are not huge percents, but we definitely see a trend up at all levels of education. So as I said, I think the big takeaway from the report is, there has been, while the change has not been dramatic over the last 10 years, we have made progress.
That's really interesting. And another area or field of of study that we're aware of, at least, that's still struggling with diversity is in sort of the computational sciences as well. So I look forward to digging into the data a little bit there, but the engineering numbers are really, really very interesting. One thing that
computation I want to mention.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I think the skilled technical workforce is going to be data is going to become increasingly important over the next 5-10 years, especially for the computational sciences, is a lot of people that do computer science for a living don't get a bachelor's degree anymore. They will go and they will train themselves and they'll get various certifications and they'll get a job and they'll get to work and they do really well. So it's going to be interesting to see, given the racial, ethnic, gender distribution of younger people, especially those under 35, especially those under, I would say, between 25 and 30, who are going to go into these fields and take a chance on not going to school and not, absorbing all that debt, but instead going out and doing it themselves. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the skilled technical workforce over the next 10 years.
Absolutely. And what a smart move to really dig into the skilled technical workforce. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the computational side of that, just look at all the self-made billionaires out there in Silicon Valley, who don't have advanced degrees. So that's very prescient, I think, to start.
And just to give a little bit of an advertisement for NCSES, we are working with several partners to come up with a survey from some survey data around the skilled technical workforce. We had hoped that would have been available earlier. Unfortunately, COVID, et cetera, has been delaying things. And I believe that's scheduled for release in the next 2 years. I don't have an exact date, but keep an eye out for that.
Fantastic. We will definitely promote that once we see it. I wanted to drill in also just a little bit on the persons with disabilities data. All too often, I mean, we work primarily, our audience is usually policymakers, and all too often persons with disabilities is just not thought of in terms of diversifying the STEM enterprise. And the numbers do appear, to be heading in a positive trajectory, but I was concerned looking at the slide about unemployment in particular. And so I'm curious if you've observed any trends between, degrees, attainment of persons with disabilities increasing relative to unemployment in STEM careers decreasing. Is there any sort of linear relationship there, or anything more you could say about persons with disabilities?
Well, one thing I will say about what's nice about the WMPD report is the PD, the persons with disability, because we're one of the, I think it's one of the only reports around that does focus on persons with disabilities, but it's still a small population, and that does limit how much detail we can provide about persons with disability. Now, I wish I had those slides with me. I'm going to see quickly if I can pull up some of the slides, but I will encourage people, because unfortunately I'm not an expertise in this particular area, but I encourage people to take a look at the data tables that are available. We do put out as much detailed data about persons with disabilities as possible. But we've got to remember this is still it's a survey, and a lot of that, well, it's not a survey, it uses a lot of information from various surveys, and so we're unfortunately limited on what we can say about persons with disabilities. But we'll see what happens in the future if we can expand that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's my takeaway every time I read this report every 2 years, but it sort of re-energizes me every couple of years that we have so much more work to do in this area, whether it's engaging with the disabilities community, advocacy community, or raising this as an issue with policymakers as well. One of the WMPD Day panels I listened to yesterday talked about, I think it was Marcia McNutt actually from the Academies talking about how making research vessels more welcoming and capable of having folks with some physical disabilities participate in the research, and just these things that often are overlooked. And so I think these data are very powerful. I wanted to ask if others participating had any questions or wanted to chime in.
Hi, Wendy. I can ask a quick question if that's okay.
Oh, great. Hi, Julie.
Absolutely.
So Liz, I was wondering if you could talk about sort of where you see the biggest data gaps and like where the biggest unanswered questions are.
One of the biggest gaps was, I mean, I hate to go back to just the skilled technical workforce, but one of the big gaps for us in the last 5 or so years, and this was even before I joined NCSES, was the skilled technical workforce. And we are working our best to correct that by incorporating more information about this from what we can from this report, working with other researchers to develop various resources, databases, to compile information about the skilled technical workforce, even before our skilled technical workforce survey data is online. I would agree with Wendy that there is more of a gap on disability, scientists with disabilities. That is going to be harder to overcome unless we significantly increase the size of our surveys and do some specific sampling because it's a relatively small population, and that always limits what we can say. People have got to remember, smaller populations are just harder to get information from, and even if we get a basic national number on them, we may not be able to break it out into detailed information just because the population is so sparse. I would like to see, if it was up to me personally, and it's not, because I'm just discussing this project. I don't run the WMPD project. I would like to see a little bit more of a discussion about what happens between K through 12, because we focus far too much on what happens after the bachelor's degree. But the problem is, by the time kids get to college, we've lost probably about anywhere between 6% and 14% of students before they even get to college because of dropout rates. And that is, of course, not equal across all the race and ethnic groups. So I get a little frustrated when people sit there and focus on, BA plus, because we've already lost a lot of people, and there might be ways to shore up those gaps. And also, I'd like people to recognize that we tend to focus on PhDs as well, and I know PhDs are important. I have one, I like them, so I don't mean anything by that. But the people I was just pulling these numbers. About 4 in 10 people who work in a science occupation have a bachelor's degree. So that's darn near half. And so I think we also have to remember that, you can work in the science occupation with just a bachelor's degree and work your way up in these various agencies and in labs, et cetera. So those are that isn't NCSES's views. That's my views of what I would see and what I would find interesting.
That's fascinating, though, and it begs my question, which is, with your NCSES hat on, two things. One, are there any NCSES products that do measure K to 12 measurement in STEM? I'm sure Department of Ed has some measuring there, but also, I'm curious if you know of uses of these data, of this biannual report, other than it's congressionally mandated and you have to produce it, but how else is it being used? I could see it as being a very influential tool with university administrators of where the trends are and the need to get to kids younger, which is a huge piece of both of the NSF bills that I talked about earlier as well. So there's a trend, so an understanding that you need to capture sooner, but it's trying to actually make that happen and getting beyond the rhetoric. So I'm just curious about who uses these data And if you have a sense of that, and then the participation of K through 12 in measuring that in science.
We do have a separate report that looks at K through 12 issues. I don't think we've updated that for at least a year, maybe two. I think we tend to be on a biannual update of our reports. So the K through 12 is on our radar. I would just like to see it folded into this report as a specific section saying, hey, you're talking about pathways, you're talking about education pathways. We got issues even before they hit bachelor's. And even just a hat tip to that, because, I was looking at, for example, the NCSES, National Center for Education Statistics, National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's the NAEP, the NAEP numbers. And I was looking at the percent of people who are proficient in science, proficient or above in science at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade levels. It's abysmal. Yeah. I mean, it's abysmal, and it scares the heck out of me because we can't even produce, not even a third of our high school graduates are proficient in science. They're not going to go on and be our future scientists. So it's on our radar. I would just like to see it rolled into this. I will say I don't know if any of you know about our science and engineering indicators reports.
Oh, yes.
We spent the last 3 or 4 years reconfiguring that whole report and breaking it out to a series of reports, and I think it's been very successful. And we got a lot of positive feedback. WMPD will probably be going through the same thing over the next 2 years. It was just something we should do over several years, these things that we should, revive reports, et cetera. So, I'm not sure what will be included or excluded next year, but I imagine we'll see more STEM or definitely skill technical workforce stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if we see K through 12 stuff, et cetera. So we'll see what happens in the future. Other uses of our data. This is a bit of a weakness. And it's funny that you should ask me this question because I've been tasked with developing a user analytics. And one of the things that we're trying to do is get a better handle of who has been using the report, who in the media cites the report, what kind of academic work uses the data. It's not super easy to do that because it's not super easy to kind of scrape these data together. But I would say we were hoping with one of the reasons we did the Women and Minorities, the WMPD Day, was to really highlight these statistics, especially given the priorities of the Biden administration, how they want to focus more on these issues. And so we're hoping that this particular report will get even greater play than, say, our report from the last 2 years did. So unfortunately, I can't answer that directly. Invite me back 2 years from now and ask me that again, and I will have the data for you.
We absolutely will. I find it so useful, and we love the changes that have been made to the indicators too, just the usability and the smaller sort of snapshots and chunks that are released at different points in time. It is just really helpful and brief and all of that. So yeah, kudos on that, and we look forward to seeing something like that happen with this report because the data are so useful, and we just want to help you make it as usable as possible for those who need it. So thank you, Liz, for joining us today. This was really great. I hope that if folks have questions, those who watch this after the fact can contact you.
Absolutely. Any comments, questions, ideas, whatever you want, send them my way. And if I can't answer them or if I'm not the right person, I'll make sure I'll find someone who can.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And we will invite you back.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, folks, for those of you who stuck around and for those of you tuning in after the fact, let me just pull up our homework slide here very quickly. There we go. Okay, so earlier I talked about all the different nominating opportunities that are happening right now. We take that very seriously, especially with the new administration. There are so many opportunities right now to engage, to participate, to advise the federal government. We've talked in the past about advisory committees and other scientific bodies that have been eliminated or just ignored or not populated over the last 4 years, and that's changing. And so when you see these opportunities come across your desk through the COSSA Washington update or from your own institution, we really do want you to either consider participating or think who you might be good nominees for these positions. So the Evaluating the 2020 Census panel, again, due tomorrow. The Vision for a New Data Infrastructure for Federal Statistics and Social and Economic Research, May 21st. Those are both National Academies activities. And then the all-important National Science Board. There's only 1 or 2 people on the 25-member board right now who are in the social and behavioral sciences, and we need more, especially given the support of this administration on social behavioral science. I think it would be a welcome addition. So please share your ideas there. COSSA is happy to submit nominations if you're not in a position to send us those names. And then just hold your calendars. We will be back June 10th, and we are working on the topic now. So stay tuned for that. And join us the second Thursday of every month. Tell your friends and send us your ideas for deep dives. This is what we've covered over the last 12 months. So if you're not able to participate live, go and check out the recordings and the slides, and you can always touch base with anyone on our team if you have questions about any of these. And with that, I think we will give you a few minutes back in your day. And thank you for joining. We will see you next time. Take care.